comfortable in your seats. If you want to take a break at this time, that's also really quite okay. In the late 1990s, The Fifth Element was released, a creative but mediocre science fiction movie featuring Bruce Willis, flying taxis, and imaginative costuming. The plot was forgettable. Something about finding the four elements of air, water, earth, fire, blah, blah, blah. Something about a race against a planet-threatening evil, only to be united and redeemed by the fifth element, love. I'm mildly embarrassed that teenage me loved this movie, with the cheese layered on so thick that it was too much even for this Dutch woman. Still, that metaphor of the fifth element stuck with me, that love as the unifying force is compelling in its unspoken presence and divine quality. Years later, I conjured up my own metaphor, not an element, but a fifth dimension. The four dimensions define our existence in space-time, at least according to conventional physics, then perhaps prayer occupies the fifth dimension. It's dangerous business mixing metaphors of the physical and the metaphysical. Let us be clear that the analogy is not a scientific or an empirical one, but a spiritual and an intuitive one. Prayer can feel intangible, yet compelling in its unspoken presence, bound together in love. During this high holiday cycle, during Elul, and also for Rosh Hashanah, I gave several sermons on how to understand God in new ways. This was intentional. We deconstruct a concept, we critique it, take it apart, redefine it, and then put it back together again. This deconstruction and reconstruction may look different for each person, but its common purpose is to invite a modern God wrestler, which is what Yisrael means, into a potentially new experience of the divine, our universe, and the self. This sermon will explore prayer. You know, that thing that we've been doing for the past, 1.5 hours. Let's start with this first observation. Prayer is very weird. It's weird. It's very weird. The Hebrew word tefillah and the English word prayer are radically different. And the English prayer does no justice to its Judaic meaning. To pray in English means to beseech or to ask. There's a submissive quality to it. Yet in the Hebrew, the root word palal, pei, lamed, lamed, comes from the word to judge. The verb lehit palel, which we ordinarily translate as to pray, is a reflective and a reciprocal verb in the hit pa'el binyan for all you Hebrew grammar nerds out there. In other words, to pray in Hebrew means to judge oneself. Lehit palel has an internal quality to it. Hold that thought. Now we are speeding down the road of Jewish history. Prayer in the dawn of Jewish history was the sacrificial system, of course. From the days of the patriarchs and the matriarchs to Leviticus, right up to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, the sacrificial system, while not the only form of worship, was a key form of worship as it was seen as central to upholding the cosmic order and the relationship between God and the Jewish people. While we do not pine for temple offerings, there are some deep truths in sacrificial offerings that bring spiritual insight. If the word tefillah suggests internality, the word for sacrifice, korban, from the root kuf resh bet, suggests relationality. Lekarev, the intensive PL verb, based on the same root, means to draw near. In modern Ivrit, Coralville are your relations or your relatives. To bring a sacrifice is to draw near to the source of life, because you are bringing a gift that is truly worthy. In an ancient agrarian subsistence economy, an offering, be it animal or vegetable, would have been the choicest, engaging in a high-stakes metaphysical contract. When Abraham hovers his sacrificial knife over his son's throat in the Agudas, which we read on Rosh Hashanah, we wholeheartedly condemn the action and puzzle at his insanity. But we understand Abraham's cultural framework of burnt offerings. Other korbanot in our tradition are, albeit carnivorous, far more benevolent, and a way for the community, its officiants, and its participants to share in the bounty of meat and produce. The korbanot did not only draw people close to God, but also close to each other in a truer form of relationship. In contrast to this stands the worship through the lips, the Avodat Shebalev. Our ultimate paradigm for prayer through words was Hannah, in the first book of Samuel. This is our Rosh Hashanah Haftorah. Hannah is the barren and taunted co-wife of Elkanah, and as the family travels to a cultic center at Shiloh, she heads out for the sanctuary where she passionately prays for the child. The corrupt high priest accuses her of drunkenness. Hannah's piety does not capture the heart of the story. Instead, Hannah demonstrates that prayer is protest. She holds the powerful to account, including God. She became the rabbinic model for the emotional power of the Amidah. The Hasidic movement of Eastern Europe shows us the mystical road to prayer, devekut, cleaving, or hitbodedut, solitary contemplation, to prayer away from the study halls and into the forests and fields. While internality, relationality, and protest were core elements, prayer also became about divine communion and union, the experience of feeling connected to all life. The Talmud describes that each blade of grass has an angel cheering its growth. The Hasidim proclaimed that there was no place without God, that all was God. Our universe immanently, vibrantly, alive, only hidden by the blinkers we put on our own eyes. With the relentless march of the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, our relationship to Judaism and its conventional ideas of God were renegotiated in the span of decades. The Yiddish secularists of the late 19th and early 20th century pushed back against prayer altogether. Only a few decades after that, the Shoah made a mockery of whatever preconceived notions we had about God and God's intervening power. Against the blackened sky of the mid-20th century, the furnaces of hatred burned. To this day, we have not fully reckoned with the enormity of that loss. Baregel echad, as Rabbi Hillel would have it, on one foot, we have journeyed through the long history of Jewish prayer. This sermon is not a history lesson. I wouldn't dare, in a college town, give a history lesson. But it is important to have context as we remember the earlier point. Prayer is weird. Case in point, we are gathered for Kol Nidre, and we heard the ancient Aramaic words sung beautifully by our cantorial soloist, Leah. Many of us may not understand the words. We glance through the translation on the opposite page. We are not fully informed of the meaning of Kol Nidre, though we know it has something to do with the absolution of vows. Still, its haunting melodies affect us deeply as each Yom Kippur makes an emotional deposit in our memory bank. Kol Nidre explores an inner landscape that few words can describe. Likewise, we have just chanted our Al-Chetz and Ashanus and tapped our chests. We will stand, so much standing, and we will bow, so much bowing, and we will kiss the Torah, and some of us will kneel, and prayer, it's weird because it has a hold, both over our body and soul. In a secular world where we celebrate the negation of the Cartesian mind-body dichotomy, it may still be hard for us to internalize that embodied and integrative truth when it comes to prayer. Prayer is also weird because realistically, liturgy is more likely to bore than elate us. We struggle through reams and reams of archaic texts where we have to unpack difficult metaphors, hence my Malchuyot sermon. It is likely to be a lovely day out tomorrow, and we may not be able to suppress the thought that taking a walk in the woods may be a more spiritual way to spend Yom Kippur than leafing through the pages of the Machzor. Meanwhile, we can give you a beautiful outdoors, masked optional worship space in the tent. Come check it out. Prayer is also weird because during the high holidays, our Erev, our mixed multitude, all of us here, our mixed multitude of doubters and skeptics and scientists and spiritualists and seekers all come together to give voice to hopes we may not believe in, to speak desires we do not imagine having, and open our hearts to a transformation we do not expect. On an immersive, timeless day like this Talmudically named Yom Arichta, the long day, we enter a parallel dimension where we detach ourselves from our daily concerns and re-soul ourselves. So if prayer is so weird, if prayer is such a strange thing, why do we do it? Why do we even pray? Let's clear away some theological rubble. Many of us, myself included, do not believe in a conventionally interventionist and judgmental God. Throughout Elul, we explored process theology, a branch of religious thought that posits that God works not through coercive, but through persuasive power, through lures, to entice us to turn to the right path, like cosmic heartstrings being tugged. A related branch of religious thought is open theism. My encounter with open theism was unexpected. I heard a beloved rabbinic teacher, Rabbi Shai Held, who teaches at the traditional egalitarian Torah Institute Hadar in New York. I heard him debate theologian Thomas J. Oord, a Christian open theist. So the open refers to the essential axiom that God does not control time or predestination, and therefore does not eradicate human free will. I was so intrigued by the premise that I bought one of Oord's introductory texts, a book called Open and Relational Theology, an Introduction to Life-Changing Ideas. Thomas J. Oord is as good a writer as he is a speaker. His book is a very accessible and readable text, brimming with personal anecdotes and moving vignettes. It's a theology book for non-theologians. In this book, Oord, like Rabbi Bradley Artson in his God of Becoming and Relationship book, dismantles the, I quote, conventional God, which he calls in no uncertain terms, all right, here we go, masculine, the timeless God, the uninfluenced God, the controlling God, the intervening God, the foreknowing God, the angry God, a lot like a narcissist. You don't like this God? No, I don't like this God either. There's kind of a zealous atheism that dismisses all theology altogether, which granted, I have some sympathy for the impulse. But that atheism lets this horrendous totalitarian God off the hook. Hardline atheists and fundamentalist theists keep each other locked in an epic but unwinnable battle. This battle pulls us into ever-tightening grips of judgment and cruelty, especially when religion is wedded to power. And as a principle of both Teshuvah and Tikkun Olam, it is essential that we break this binary and evolve a healthier, kinder theology, which is what Artson and Oord and Held seek to do. Process theology and open theism generate a quantum field of theological possibilities, another dangerous metaphor, that invites us not just into the weirdness of prayer, but also its wonder. And with the Machzor in our hand, we can critique the text of the Unatana Toka. And at the same time, be deeply moved and open to possibility that in this sacred space, we are building something together freely and lovingly. According to open theism, God cannot compromise human free will, or, as Oord writes, it's time to dump that controlling boyfriend in the sky. He has a lot of great singers like that. And that by definition, God is loving. Yes, a Jewish belief, God is loving. Out of this understanding of God's love, Oord distills a question that makes me wonder if he took a sneak peek at the Machzor. Quote, is God more like a caring mother or a ruling king? Avinu Malkeinu. He answers his own question with, this leader of life, he says, God is more like a caring mother than a ruling king. God is more like a dance than a fortress. If open and relational thinkers had to choose between God being more like wind or cement, wind wins out. And with that, Oord fine-tunes a compelling theory of prayer that it unites its weird disparate parts. Prayer as internal, relational, prayer as protest, prayer as mysticism. His open theism both affirms that it is in God's very divine nature to be loving, a tenet emphasized in our Machzor over and over and over again. Look for it. Yet also self-limiting to give humans free will. The point of prayer is not to pull a series of cosmic levers and pulleys, but to connect with divine love and impact that divine love, as well as with one's truest self. I believe that grace is where God's love and the human soul meet. I'm going to quote Oord again. I don't believe my prayers force God to do some task, nor does praying enable God to force some outcome by controlling people, other creatures, or circumstances. But my prayers become new data, pertinent information, relational input, and points of possibility that God can use in the next moment. My prayers are actions that generate new options. From an open and relational perspective, prayer affects the one praying, those being prayed for, and the God who responds. End quote. The weirdness of prayer is its paradox. We rightfully question its efficacy, yes, righteously tap into its healing properties. We skeptically inquire the purpose of turning inward, yet when the gates of Nidre close against the darkening sky, many may feel a brush with a transcendent grace that we can neither explain nor justify. Prayer is the fifth dimension, beyond time and space, that fifth element of love. It reminds us of the ability to be moved, to be compassionate, to voice our pain, to express our anger, to hold the tears of self and others, to protest injustice and bear witness to it, to be surprised and delighted and profoundly grateful by the immeasurable beauty and mystery of it all. Tefillah, friends, is the silver thread that connects us to the great all and our inner universe. Prayer isn't just weird, it's audaciously weird. It's chutzpah. So here is a bold proposal for you. I gently invite us to take an emotional risk praying this Yom Kippur, no matter what our starting point is or what method we use. Use the Machzor or not. Stay in your seat or go outside. Seek solitude in the meditation room. Stretch your legs and your arms to heaven. Feel the wind in your face or the music in your heart. At Ne'ilah, come before the open ark. There is no right or wrong way to tend to the unfolding of your own soul. Ord reminds us, quote, when we pray with integrity, we also love ourselves. Prayers of integrity honor our intelligence and quest for truth. Open and relational theology doesn't ask us to pretend to believe in anything we can't. In closing, I want to share Ord's belief about how God works in our lives through God's persuasive power of love and the values affirmed in us. His wisdom reads like a pristine Yom Kippur prayer, an inverse vidui, an inverse confessional for this beautiful and grace-filled Yom Kippur. I quote, God invites us to experience meaningful relationships. God calls us to stop acting in ways that hurt others. God seeks to liberate the oppressed and include the marginalized. God calls us to love ourselves well, including practicing self-care. God encourages therapeutic processes by working to heal our bodies and psychoses. God invites us to forgive and, where possible, reconcile. God calls us to right relationships with lifelong partners and families. God works to establish loving societies and civilizations. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be so. May Tefillah grant us strength, compassion, and resolution to fulfill the hope and the promise of Yom Kippur, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, building the world on love. Gemar Chatimat Tova, a good ceiling, and happy praying for the remainder of the sacred day.